Hello and welcome to WissLit. I'm your host, Matt Heppy. Today we'd like to welcome Angela Pucetas, a Wissahickon High School English teacher and the author of the poetry collection, Overthought Thoughts of a 21-Year-Old. Angela, welcome to WissLit.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Angela, would you briefly describe Overthought Thoughts of a 21-Year-Old for our audience?
Yeah, so pretty much this is a collection of 140 poems that I wrote spanning between about 2 to 3 years, from 19 to 21. And it's essentially my diary from that time. And it's really just a bunch of prose poems that talk a little bit about themes of identity, loss, love, a little bit of what it's like just to go through heartbreak. And the goal of this was really to create some sort of common shared humanity that I could put out there for the world, and really help my students who are a similar age. I teach juniors, so they're 17 years old, 16, 17, and they may be going through something that's very similar with some of the themes in the poems. So I figured that it was almost selfish for me to keep it to myself, and I wanted to put it out there.
Did you write it knowing that you were writing to a future audience of potential students, or was this entirely for yourself?
That's a really good question. I wrote it more for myself, and everything that was in this, journal or diary where I grabbed all these poems from was really just a therapeutic outlet for me. And then it kind of turned into a, hey, this could really help other people. And, being a teacher, that's my goal, is to help the younger generation. And I kind of was student teaching during this time period when I was 21 as well. So that pushed me forward to thinking, hey, maybe this isn't just a selfish endeavor and a form of therapy for me, but it could kind of be a form of therapy for somebody else too. So it wasn't the intent, but I'm glad that I kind of took it there.
One of the things that struck me more than anything else was that your poetry doesn't keep any secrets. You put your heart out there on display for everybody to see.
Oh yeah.
What was that like?
It was very, very hard, if I'm being completely honest. It was really difficult. I struggled with, pulling back a little bit and thinking, what exactly do I want to share and put out there? It was very difficult to be vulnerable. And that's something that I try to live my life by now, is just, having this real authenticity about myself and sharing how I'm feeling no matter what the day, no matter, what's going on in my life, and just choosing, I guess, courage over comfort is kind of what I say for that. That's something that I stole from Brene Brown, who's one of my favorite researchers. She's a shame researcher and a professor. And she said that once about vulnerability is if we're going to be vulnerable, we have to choose courage over comfort, because when we're comfortable, we're not getting much done. So that was what I lived by, and I wanted to take that advice and run with it and think, comfortable is not getting me anywhere, so I'm going to be vulnerable, and I'm going to push this out, even though it's going to feel icky and murky at first, but it'll get better.
And so I made the assumption while reading it that this was your true feeling and your true story. Is it autobiographical? Is everything in Overthought Thoughts your true thoughts and feelings, your true story? Or is any of it fictional or embellished?
That is such a good question that I received from a lot of people, specifically my grandma who read this. She picked this up and was like, oh my gosh, please tell me some of this stuff didn't really happen to you. But it's very much embellished, very much dramatized. I think poetry, that's what makes it so beautiful, is its embellishment, and it's very hyperbolic in nature. And so I leaned into that. I wanted to highlight personification. I wanted to highlight the drama. I mean, one of the poems is labeled a broken leg. I think it is a broken leg on a marble floor. I didn't really have a broken leg on a marble floor, but there's imagery there, there's symbolism, and I think that that's what makes poetry so beautiful, is embellishing a little bit. They're all based in true feelings, but they are expanded and blown up into a larger proportion, if that makes sense.
Now, one thing you did while you were writing, each poem has a title, but then it also has a timestamp. Can you tell us what's that about? Why are there timestamps with each poem?
Yeah, that was my way of trying to make this as authentic of a diary as possible, because I wanted it to kind of mimic that diary feeling. So some of them say like 12:47 a.m., others say like 2:35 p.m., and there's very much a difference between the ones that I wrote at night and the ones that I wrote maybe in the morning or throughout the day. And I wanted to really emphasize just, that when you get home and your life is really busy, like mine was at the time, and if you're a people pleaser by nature like myself, I'm a middle child, like people pleaser to a fault. So I felt like I was spreading myself thin for everybody else during the day, and then I got home and I really didn't have time to think about myself or my feelings or process anything until I went to bed at night. So most of my favorite poems from this are the ones that I wrote late at night. So I wanted to show that with the timestamps and show the ones that say like 2, 3 in the morning. It means that I'm like ruminating over something still.
That's one thing I was wondering the most about as I was reading was how conscious were you as an author of the difference between the ones that were at 3 a.m. and the ones that were at 11 a.m.?
Yeah, I think it's funny because I didn't really notice that until I read it back after I had published it. And I knew that they were my favorite poems. Like I knew the ones that were late at night were the best, and I think the most tragic, but the most beautiful at the same time. And I didn't really notice that there was such a difference though until I read it back, and I'm thinking, oh wow, you can really tell what happens.
I love that. I mean, I thought that was a terrific element to it, so
Yeah.
I'm glad that you did that.
Thanks.
When we come back, we'll speak with Angela about her writing process.
I think it's very important that the students understand that we have print resources here in the library, that is books. We also subscribe to several databases which provide links to articles, scholarly articles from journals, in addition to, as I said, the print and online digital resources. There are also human resources. I am more than happy to work with students at any time. They always know where to find me because I'm always here. So any help that we can provide, we are certainly more than willing to do that for anybody at any time.
Welcome back. If you're just tuning in, I'm your host, Matt Heppy. Today, joining us on WissLit is Angela Pucetas, author of Overthought Thoughts of a 21-Year-Old. Angela, we talked about your timestamps, and I was wondering if, do you write when inspiration strikes, or do you have a schedule? Some of your poems are written at 3 a.m. and some at 11 a.m.
Yeah, so I usually don't have a set schedule. I kind of just write whenever inspiration strikes, and I like to think of writing as, and I know I said this earlier too, but as a therapeutic way for me to just kind of get my feelings out there. And it's really, I notice I write anytime that I feel like I've had a lot going on in life, I feel a little bit bogged down maybe just by stress, and that's when I tend to write more. So for me, it's usually at nighttime because that's when I have a moment of rest. But it could be in the morning occasionally, like on a weekend, if I have a moment just to have a cup of tea and a scone, I love that.
So why were you up at 1:42 a.m. or
Well,
3:42 a.m.?
Yeah, that is something that a lot of my students will ask after they read this, and I just say, college,
College.
College is my response. Once you get to college, you'll understand, kids. But yeah, I was pulling all-nighters, I was just up late and hanging with friends and all of that. So I think the later poems just really were the ones that I was most proud of. And by nature, like when you're younger, you want to go to bed later. Like you're a little wired still. I wouldn't say the same thing now at my age. I'm in bed by 9:30. But.
Were there times you couldn't get to sleep until you got the words on the page?
Yeah. Yes, that's a really good question. I would struggle and I just toss and turn, and I think a lot of that is articulated in these poems, is that just chaos of the brain, as I call it, in certain poems, and that feeling that you can't turn it off until you get it out there. So yeah, for me, there's not really a structure. It's just whatever I'm going through in my life and if I need to dump it down.
How much intentionality was there that this would become a book one day, or was that not something you set out to do? Or did you say, I'm going to write the story of a 21-year-old and her thoughts, or was it a journal?
It really was a journal, and I mean that in such a sincere, unpretentious way. I did not think about publishing this until I would say second semester of my senior year of college. That's when I was teaching 7th grade out in Lancaster County, and I had some students come up to me just voicing their, struggles with anxiety and just how it's hard to be a human in today's world. And I thought, wow, you could really benefit from some of these poems. And that's when I kind of had this idea, what's it like to self-publish? And maybe I should look into that. And I did some research, I found Amazon, and I really just wanted to push it out there. But it definitely was not my intent. I just needed to help myself at the time and write.
Now, I'm not a poet, and to me, when I think of poets, I'm thinking of quill pens and leather-bound tomes. And so when you were writing, where were you writing? Was it whatever paper was around, or did you have a special book where everything went?
As magical and mystical as that sounds, I wish I had a quill pen. But no, I just kind of, sometimes an idea would come into my mind throughout the day, and I'd grab my phone real quick and I'd put it in my notepad on my iPhone, and then I'd go home at night and think, oh, that was a great idea, let me expand upon it. And then I'd grab my journal and I'd write just pen and paper. But I always had everything at the end of the day in the same notebook, because if I didn't, I felt really unorganized and I felt like I would lose some of my ideas. So even if I did have a moment of inspiration before having my journal with me, I would write it down and then I'd transfer it into the journal. And then the journal became my laptop when I went to publish, and I would type everything.
All right. You typing it in on notes on your phone is not quite as romantic as I envisioned of the
Sorry to let you down.
Also, as a non-poet, I often, when I think of poetry, I think of rhyme scheme and meter. And I noticed there were only a couple of the poems where there was a definite rhyme scheme to what you were doing there. Again, how much intentionality was there to that? Or was this stream of consciousness?
Yeah, I think it was very much stream of consciousness. For myself, and what I appreciate in poets is free form, not so much structured. I teach a creative writing class at WissLit High School, and I think for me what I try to emphasize with the poetry unit is that this old version of poetry that we see with Shakespearean sonnets and things that are very formulaic, it's not as modern as what we see now. And I was really inspired by poets like Rupi Kaur, who published Milk and Honey. That was one of my favorite poetry collections. And I noticed that she didn't really rhyme. She kind of just said what she had to say, and then she let the imagery talk for her. And that's what I tried to do. I tried to lean into a lot of literary devices like, and techniques like personification and metaphors, similes, imagery, sensory details. And I felt like there was so much already packed into the poems that a rhyme scheme, at times, because some have rhyme, but at times it felt cheap to just throw that in there because, if that makes sense.
And what was the critique process like? Do you have beta readers and critique partners and editors, or is this from your heart and so it is as it should be in its original form?
Yeah, I didn't really have many people who critiqued. I showed this to my family first. I sent it to my parents one night when I was living away still. It was my senior year of college. I said, I think I'm writing a book. This is what I've got. And I sent it to them. Of course, them being my parents were, oh my gosh, this is amazing. You gotta publish it. So they weren't really much with the feedback. But I did send it to one person who I sat down with. His name was Herbert Byam. He is a good friend of mine. And we went to high school together, and we both majored in English at Millersville. So we followed each other to college. And he was the only person that I really let see this before it went out. And shout out to Hobie. He was a great friend, and he definitely helped me with the structure, I think, of my poems, and just small grammatical things too. But besides that, I didn't really have a community to go to. Now I do, because I just graduated from St. Joe's, and I have a lot of friends that are in the writing world. So yeah, that's it.
Were there ever thoughts of trying to find a big publisher and get a contract or anything like that? Or was this always going to be a work from the heart that you were going to put out for just family and students and friends, or were there big dreams involved there?
Yeah, There weren't many big dreams at the time. However, now I would have loved to had this picked up by a publisher, because I didn't realize how much self-publishing, you have to promote yourself and how much work goes into it. But I think my intentions were so pure to just go out to friends, family, and I really wasn't in it for the money and the fame. But now I definitely would love to be picked up. As a 27-year-old, I'm speaking differently than 21. But yeah, I think my intentions were just to get it out there, and whatever the format is, that's how it is.
But in any way, it's a wonderful accomplishment to have done that. When we come back, we'll speak with Angela about her future writing projects.
I think it's very important that the students understand that we have print resources here in the library, that is books. We also subscribe to several databases which provide links to articles, scholarly articles from journals, in addition to, as I said, the print and online digital resources. There are also human resources. I am more than happy to work with students at any time. They always know where to find me because I'm always here. So any help that we can provide, we are certainly more than willing to do that for anybody at any time.
Welcome back to WissLit. I'm Matt Heppy. We're here with Angela Pucetas. Angela, how did writing Overthought Thoughts affect you as a person? The writing and also the publishing. Was it therapeutic? Was it joyful? What was it like?
Yeah, despite the fact that a lot of these poems are sad. I mean, there's no way around it. A lot of these poems are sad. It was a very joyful process for me, and it was one that I look back on and I'm really proud of, because I think that, being a young college kid, you just have all these fears of not making it and not, being successful in the world. But I think when I published this, I started feeling like there's a space for me out in the real world, and it doesn't have to be just, I'm a teacher or I am a student. I can be an author too. And it was just a really therapeutic and joyful experience that I, really appreciated. I'm glad I did it.
So it's been 6 years since the book was published, and so what's it like to look back at the book with 6 years under your belt?
Yeah, I can honestly say that I read this book from a different place now. I do look at it and I almost feel sorry for my past self, and I have empathy towards that person because I do feel so different and more mature and confident and grown. And sometimes I read this and I just have a moment where I need to pause and close the book and just feel that again and feel that way. And when I do that, I think I can relate to my students a little bit better, because I think this is literally a documentation of everything I was going through when I was younger. And I try to use that to drive empathy towards, the kids that I teach, and think, a lot of these things that I think now may have been vapid were a really big deal back then. And so I look at it from a different place, and I am so much happier because a lot of these, like I said, are emotional and sad. But, I appreciate it, and I appreciate every stage that life gives me.
So, being 6 years older and at a different place in your life, are you going to write another book, and would it be the same type?
No. Well, I'm going to write another book, but not the same type. I think I want to switch it up and do some sort of personal narrative or like a memoir style. But I'm still gaining confidence with that. Poetry's always been my thing, and I'm very confident in my poems. But when it comes to prose and, writing a personal narrative about my own life, you can't hide behind imagery as much, and you can't hide behind some of the embellishment. It's a lot more clear-cut, and that's something that I'm nervous to do. But we'll see. We'll see if I put that out there.
Now, you're a public high school teacher. Does that come into play when you think about the words you'll put onto the page, knowing that your 16, 17, 18-year-old students and their parents and the administrators could read what you're writing?
Very much so. I always let that guide me. And I even let that guide me when I was creating my poetry collection, too, because I always had that in mind. And I knew that I would be a teacher someday, even though I wasn't at the moment. I've always had, a really good moral compass, and I think that I want to be seen as a role model to my students, so I would never put anything in there that would jeopardize that. So yeah, I do have to be very filtered, and that's tough because I don't want to lose my authenticity, and I don't want the writing to feel inauthentic, but you know, it's a line that I always need to make sure I don't cross. So, yeah.
A lot of people dream of being an author. A lot of people dream of publishing a book. What does it mean to you that you've done that?
It means that if you are a quiet, shy person, and writing is the way that you express yourself, you can chase that and be successful. And you know, to me, being an author is a lot of different things. I can be an author without having a single person buy my book. It's just the fact that I have written something that has my name on it, and that maybe I've shown to a few people. That still makes me an author. It still makes me a writer. I don't think the money has as much to do with it, because that's always a conception that like I used to hold. But yeah, I still think being an author is a really wonderful thing, and I'm proud to have that title next to my name.
Have you had any students come to you and say that they'd like to write a book or they'd like to be published someday, and have you given them advice about how they should pursue that dream?
Yeah, many have. I'm very overwhelmed actually with how many, and in a good way, in the best way possible. And I have given some advice. I've given them some advice on how to write proposals that you then push out to publications, and that's still something that I'm learning too. And I've also helped one student specifically. I think she graduated maybe back in 2020 at this point, but I helped her try to get onto what was Create Space at the time for Amazon, which is how I published, and you know, self-publish herself. So it's something that I'm proud to help them with.
Could you envision being a full-time author, like somewhere? Is there that daydream, like, or is it kind of overwhelming to think that that's all you would do all the time? Or is that something you would love to see yourself doing?
I would really love that. I think I would miss teaching at the end of the day, though. I really love the communication, and I'm a little confusing because I come across as an extrovert, but I'm also very much an introvert, and I am both at the same time. Mm-hmm. And it's always hard for me to find the middle ground, because I think as an author, I wouldn't have as much communication. I'd be sitting and writing and doing a lot behind a desk or behind a computer screen, and I would miss that interaction with my students. So my extroverted side really loves being in front of the classroom and inspiring day in and day out. So yes, I would love to be a full-time author, but I would still want to have, you know, hold on to my educator side, because it's so important to me. And at the end of the day, I consider myself an educator first and a writer second.
I thought Overthought Thoughts was a very brave, bold book, and I'm glad I had the opportunity to read it. Thank you very much for joining us here today. It's been wonderful, wonderful having you.
Thanks for having me.
To all of you, please come back and join us for the next installment of WissLit.